All right, welcome back to the Talk to Me PDD podcast. I'm your host, PDD. This is my opportunity to talk about people management, leadership, productivity, and anything that's top of mind. So today we're going to be in episode number 9, and we're going to do a deep dive into the books I read in June 2024. Before that, just a little bit about my reading challenge for this year, 2024. Goal is to read 60 books this year, so five a month. So halfway through the year, I thought it was a good time to check in and reflect on that overall goal. So on target, 31 books read at end of June. One of the things that spawned me to take on this challenge was a graphic that the Washington Post put out about books Americans read in 2023 and where the percentile was there. So thought being halfway through, I'd check back on that. So 31 books is something like, I think it's the 92nd percentile for an entire year for 2023. So it's pretty cool to look back and see where I've come so far and see what you can accomplish in, 6 months is not that long a period of time. So it reminded me of a concept that Cal Newport talks about, this idea of doing remarkable work, work that you find interesting, work that you want to talk about. So this project has definitely filled that gap for me. So a little bit on that, on track, with half a year left to go. So with that being said, books I read in June 2024, starting with Life is a Miracle by Wendell Berry. You can see this is not a super thick book, so my thinking was that I would start off with something a little shorter, get the momentum going. So even though this book is not that long, the writing is, I don't want to say dense, but contains a lot of information. So even though it's short, I wasn't just blasting through it, and I mean this in a positive way. This is my first time reading Wendell Berry. Embarrassingly enough, I hadn't read anything by him before, but just such a writer that can just put so much information into his words. So don't be fooled. It's small and somewhat short, but there's a lot of information there. So some of the concepts here, and this book is over 20 years old, but looking at sort of science and technology and the quote unquote inevitable progress that we sometimes assume. So I wanted to read this book in light of developments in AI and the ethical concerns and debate that's ongoing there right now. And I think this book is very appropriate for that if that's something you're interested in. So just exploring who is making these decisions about science and technology. Are we coming to consensus, or is there a small group of people that control these decisions, and what's their mindset in making them, not just with AI, but science and technology developments in general? So really thoughtful and interesting read. Definitely not anti-science or anti-technology, but encouraging us to be intentional about how we want to develop and what choices we have and who gets to make those choices. One of the things I also liked is that he applied that same decision making philosophy, not just to science, but to writers as well. So you can imagine if you know some sensitive information about someone, or maybe there's something that's happened in your life, if you choose to write about that publicly, that has its cost, and that may be a good decision or it may not. But in the same way that sometimes scientists feel justified in exploring the eventualities of any research, writers may feel the same way about being able to write about anything, and there's costs to both of those. So I thought that was really interesting and good to think about in terms of ethics. So that was the first one, Life is a Miracle by Wendell Berry. Very good read. Second, sort of along the same lines of ethics, is Unmasking AI by Dr. Joy Buolamwini. This is a book about bias in AI and other ethical considerations in the design of AI systems, how they can capture systemic bias, how if we're just designing these systems quote unquote neutrally, that doesn't mean that they're neutral in terms of bias. One of the things that I liked about this book, and people who are maybe not purely into reading just a dry analysis of the domain, is there's a really compelling personal narrative about her story, her career and growth in academics and professional life, and her challenges and struggles there as well. So the two are interlaced well. So it's a really enjoyable read. You're really able to connect with her as a person as well as with her research. So if you're sort of struggling to get into the pure ethics side of things, this would be a good choice. So I also really enjoyed this book. The next, in kind of a totally different area, $1 Million Weekend by Noah Kagan. I heard Noah talking about this book on Cal Newport's podcast. That was how I heard about it. He worked as an early on employee at Facebook. One of the things I really liked about this is talking about how sometimes entrepreneurs are trying to get everything perfect before they actually try and sell things, and maybe investing a lot of time and money without actually knowing if anybody wants this product. And whether you're an entrepreneur or just working in general, I think sometimes that can be a dangerous path to go down, because you invest all this time and energy and effort, and it may or may not be something that's valuable. From kind of a different conversation, I appreciated another Cal Newportism talking about how money is a proxy for value. So whether it's literally selling things or trying to get funding for things in work, it's good to have that entrepreneurial mindset to determine if an idea or a project actually has value, and then being willing to ask people for that, to see whether they say no or whether they say yes. There are some exercises in the book specifically to get people to say no, just to get comfortable with that, because it can be hard to worry about people saying no. So he has some exercises that'll help normalize that, which were cool. So really interesting read, whether or not you're sort of in the entrepreneurial domain or not. Lastly, what I liked about it is it sort of all comes full circle at the end to more of a lifestyle centric design realization or mentality that you can be the greatest seller or make lots of money in business, but that may or may not be what leads to a life of fulfillment and happiness. So kind of a cool way to come back full circle. I was a little bit surprised the rest of the beginning part of the book didn't think that we were leading there. So that was an interesting little bit of a surprise ending. So spoiler alert there. Sorry about that. Next up, the fourth one, Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. I forget where I heard about this or had it recommended, but it had been on my list for a little while. And it is really an exercise that shows so much authenticity and vulnerability, which are superpowers for leadership. So for that alone, I think it's an interesting book for people in organizational leadership to read, and just see how McConaughey approaches that. It's super entertaining book, really interesting life with lots of adventures and fun things to read about. And then whether or not that life of adventure and I guess somewhat wild times is your life or not, to think about what it means to be living your life that the way you want it to be, and what is your own personal moral code, your code of ethics. How are you going to approach your life and align it with those? So fun, really interesting read. Was really impressed with how he wrote and the way that he told stories. So I enjoyed that one a lot. Last but certainly not least is this book, The Visible Hand, which is about the development of sort of middle management and organizational hierarchy in American business. So prior to 1840, most of the businesses in the United States were driven purely by market forces, the invisible hand, as it were. But then in 1840, with the advent of the railroad and the complexity of managing those organizations, it became necessary for organizations to manage within themselves and build more complex managerial structures to be able to deliver an efficient business, more so than they could purely based on supply and demand. So really interesting book. It was definitely long and detailed, lots of names and dates and historical facts, which for me is not always the easiest read. I would say this is probably the third most challenging book I read this year. The first one definitely being People's History of the United States of America. Second one, I think, 48 Laws of Power. This one is much more readable than the 48 Laws of Power. So, but still pretty dense and lots of information. But really interesting how, in a period of less than 100 years, the structure of modern large corporations and how they're managed evolved after hundreds of years of it being driven purely by market forces. So yeah, all really good books that I enjoyed a lot. Check them out if you like. And again, it's been a really rewarding experience pushing myself to read this amount. I ended up doing some beach reading with the Visible Hand, which is not exactly a beach book, but because I had set this schedule, I was compelled to do that and hold myself accountable. And I really noticed my ability to focus, my ability to stay away from distractions has improved a lot as I've been pushing myself more here. So again, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for tuning in, and more next time.